Ms. Christmann, great to have you. Thank you so much. We actually had a member of parliament who's sitting right here from the Indian parliament. So from member of parliament to member of parliament, maybe we'll get the chance to introduce you to one another. Thank you very much for coming by. First of all, my question, of course, is responsible for aerospace and startups. How was that decision made to think about aerospace and startups as sort of one category?
Yeah, thank you for this question, and I'm happy to be here. This decision wasn't made by me, but by the one who had this function before me. And I think it makes a lot of sense because in space we have really an innovative sector, a sector where many startups are developing very interesting technologies, and we have this issue of new space as really a signal that many things are changing in the sector. So I'm really happy to have both topics because there are really many relations, and both sectors are very much about innovation and the future of our economy and society, so very important.
And can you tell us a little bit, I think a lot of people probably ask themselves, like in terms of, startups, is this a horizontal function across the government? You are sort of attached to the Ministry of the Economy. Like, how is the coordination between the ultimate, kind of ministries, and how is the startup sector kind of viewed in the big organigram of the government, if that's even possible to answer?
It is, because we have for the first time a federal startup strategy, and that is a strategy made by the whole government, and where we really work together with all the ministries to really have the best ecosystem for startups in Germany, in Europe, and we really developed many instruments in the strategy that are relevant in different sectors. And for example, the question of ESOP is something that is in close collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, and so we have really a joint strategy, and I think that is very important because innovation is not something that is just for one ministry, but it's for all the different sectors very important.
Yeah, you mentioned the ESOP. Thank you for making progress on that, which is the employee stock option pool program that finally has gone into a direction, I think, that is more competitive with other countries here in Europe and specifically in America. That's one example of a policy. Before we get to others, can you give us some update on the data landscape of startup, industries, startup activity in Germany?
I mean, we had really a very positive development all over the years, and we had a record in 2021. Then, of course, we now have a little bit a more difficult situation. We had a decrease of new foundings of startups of 20% in this year compared to the year before. But as I said, there was a record, and in the total development, we still see a very good dynamic, and we see that there are many new companies that are founded, but what we really need is to have better options for the scale-ups to really grow also in Germany and Europe. That is something that we still see as a challenge, where we want to become better, and we don't want that the only option for a startup is to go abroad or to other places of the world, because that's the only place where they can find capital. So that is something where we really have to work on still, and that is also part of our strategy, of course.
And maybe before, for sure, want to come back to that point, the sort of, the credit crunch, for scale-up companies. How do you define a startup? It's not that easy.
We don't have a definition, in fact. And that's something that I used to ask the government for, because that is the reason why we, for example, don't exactly know how many procurements are for startups from the public side, because we don't really have a definition. But what we see, and what we said also in our strategy, is that a startup is, of course, a company that really looks for scaling up something to really grow, and kind of a young company. But I think the more important question is that we really have a framework that is for many companies and especially for the new ones, of course, but also that can also be helpful for SMEs, for others. I mean, that is not that important to really be that strict in a definition. But I think the focus, of course, is on new companies, on companies that want to scale up, and on companies, of course, also in the technological sector, in the digital sector, but also in the social innovation sector. So there we really want to be open.
And what role do you see then, as the government? You mentioned, the need of companies when they grow bigger. One is being fundraise, I guess. Having access to talent would be another one. Debureaucratization, in the process of getting talent. I mean, those are some of the asks, I guess, that startups have, raised in the past. Are those some of the points that you take on for the development of policies, or are there some areas that I was missing where you think, whether it's science-led spin-off startup activity? What are sort of your maybe 3-4 core areas where you see we can give a boost to startups as a government?
I think you actually read the strategy. Is that possible? Because you mentioned many of the topics that we have. The first is indeed financing. And I'd like to mention maybe one really big instrument, I think, that is the European Tech Champion Initiative that we just started. And there we are partnering with France, with Spain, with Italy and others to have like fund of funds on the European level to really support large funds in Europe to make them possible to be as big as 1 billion euro per fund. So in total, we invest 1 billion in this fund of funds, so that has 4 billion euros almost right now. And I think that can really be a game changer in Europe because it will have a huge impact on the venture capital sector from our perspective. And of course, the goal is to put public money in it, but to also then reach that we will have more private money matching this public money. That is the goal. And then, of course, talents, you mentioned. We want to be attractive in Europe, in Germany, for people to come to work here, to start a company here, but also to work for a startup company. And therefore, we have something like new programs as ESOP, but also to make it easier with regards to visa and also with regards to language. That is something that we just decided. It's not necessary anymore to speak German, for example, to come here to work in the tech sector. I think that is a very important and concrete thing that makes it easier to come to Germany, and that is what we want to achieve. And then maybe a third factor is the spin-off aspect, which is also very important. We want to start 5 to 10 new startup factories around our universities because we see that ecosystems around universities, such as we see in Munich with the Unternehmertum, they are very successful, so that we want to support more universities to build these kind of ecosystems where really people from the university start their startup and find also contacts to investors, to the ecosystem that they need to really grow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also very impressed with the work of Unternehmertum, even though we're Berlin locals, but what the Professor Schönberger has done there is really outstanding, and it's a great testament to also what one person can really, drive in terms of getting a city totally on the map, on the global map of entrepreneurship, with the help, of course, of also private donations. When you talk about investing into funds of funds, is this for the government, and should it be for the government also a for-profit endeavor, where taxpayers' money is invested and a return is expected?
Definitely, and I think that's important to show that that is a good way to invest money, because that is something we have in Germany sometimes, that people think it's too risky and we shouldn't gamble with pensions and all these ideas that are around. And I think it's important that we show from the public side that it is really a good idea to go into venture capital, and that this is something where you can earn money. And we show that with the funds of funds programs, but also, for example, with the already existing high-tech Gründerfonds that is very successful in the seed phase more. And we also started a new program that's called Deep Tech and Climate Fund, where we also directly invest into startups in the deep tech sector with the idea to have there's a possibility to really support deep tech startups that where it might take a little bit longer to develop the product because it's deep tech and that's longer than if you just start your new website or something like that. And of course...
we have Sprint, sorry to interrupt, but Sprint was here.
Yeah.
Christian?
Sprint is another very good example. And there we make it possible that Sprint will also be able to invest in companies. They aren't allowed yet, but we will change that with a new law, which is, I think, also a very important step to really push Sprint to be as successful as possible.
So this is all the things that the tech and startup ecosystem probably would, underline as positive, great, let's do it. When it comes to regulation, I guess opinion, sometimes differs. There's a new European Union AI law that has been criticized by prominently an open letter of many of Germany's startup entrepreneurs and investors. The law is supposed to impose stricter regulation on high-risk AI applications. It is a difficult topic, I'm sure. It's a difficult question. Also regulating something now that we don't even know how it's evolving and that is, so fast-paced in its development. Where do you think we are in terms of AI regulation at the moment, and what can we expect, moving forward, policy makers to concentrate on?
Obviously, we are also looking very closely on the AI Act right now, and I think it's important that we really differentiate. On the one hand, it is important that we have the AI Act in Europe to make sure that we have a technology that respects our European values, but I think that is only the case for really the high-risk applications and for things like social scoring and surveillance, these things, I think there we have to be very clear. I think where we really have to be cautious is that we don't regulate every single application of AI in any sector, and there we are right now really looking closely on what we can achieve in the trilogue to make sure that it's really possible to still develop AI in Europe with the AI Act and to really make it doable, especially for startups and for SMEs, and to have the sandboxes that are very important to make them easy accessible, to see where can we have maybe also kind of specific regulations for startups or SMEs. These are things where we really are looking into right now, and I am totally convinced we need to have clear rules for really the human rights aspects, but it's not every AI application needs to have a human rights test or check or something like that. So there we really have to differentiate, and I really think it's important that Europe is not only the place where we make rules, but where we develop technology, and I think there we have a crucial point where we really have to make sure that that will be the case, so we have an AI Act that really supports the development of AI in Europe and not hinders it.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, maybe, what about crypto and Web3? Is there global coordination among governments, on this topic? Is your office thinking about sort of Web3 and crypto regulation as well at the moment?
Of course, there are discussions all the time. I wouldn't say as concrete as to that I could say, yeah, we are working already on any regulation. I think what is very, very important is that we have this tech dialogue also with the US side now that started in now a very regulated way, that we have an exchange on what rules and what kind of cooperation is needed in technology questions in general. That was the thing that was founded after TTIP didn't work out. And now we have this exchange with the US side really on technologies and their the need on where we also have to work together as democracies, I would say, because that is something that is also very important to me, that we show technology is something that can be developed in democracies, because we shouldn't be naive worldwide. That's not obviously the case when we think on other places in the world, and we think of COVID, where in the first place there was the impression, okay, the countries that use technology more in an autocratic way to control the pandemic might be more successful. And I think in the end that didn't really work out. But still, we should be really careful that we show democracies in Europe and other places of the world are able to really be innovative and to develop technology.
And do you think that actually the regulation sort of landscape in Europe, I mean, it is often seen as sort of hindering competitiveness of European companies. Is there an argument to make, just to steelman the other side, that it can actually be an asset to have more regulatory clarity maybe earlier than other markets? Because often when you look at crypto Web3, it is, not so much that companies fear regulation, but that, not having clarity on regulation is what makes life very difficult for founders.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's always, the first thing is to have a clear quasi regulation, and that you have a reliability, what comes next. So I think, for example, it's also very important that we have the AI Act now, and not that we will have an open situation where no one knows whether it will come or not, but that it is there at a given point of time. But still, I mean, this argument is not... You can't make it if the regulation is too hard and it's like not possible anymore to really be able to do all these things that the regulation want to have, and that it would want to have perfect data sets and things that you can't really fulfill. I mean, then also a regulation is not helpful. So I think it's good to have a regulation, but it really needs to be doable for the companies to fulfill it.
Dr. Christmann, I think we're running out of time, are we, right? Thank you so much for joining us today, and well, good luck with everything. I think the startup industry is open to talk.
Thanks for having me.
All the best. Bye-bye.